Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Before we do, I'd like to give you a chance to go ahead and test out your chat function. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I am live from Portland, Oregon. All right, we got Ohio and California, New York, Toronto, Nebraska. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Atlanta, India, Connecticut. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kara. I'll be your host as we discuss today's topic, Application Modernization, the decision that shapes business value, brought to you by Synoptek and hosted by VIB. Please take a moment to locate the Q&A button in your window. You'll use this box to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer all questions. And for those we don't get to, we'll follow up with after. Today's webinar, Application Modernization, the decision that shapes business value, explores how leaders can make modernization decisions that protect near-term outcomes while positioning the business for growth. If you've got any questions, put it in the chat and Synoptek team will reach out to you to respond. Leading today's session are two practitioners from Synoptek. We have Gitesh Tripathi, the Chief Technology Officer at Synoptek, where he drives architecture, product engineering, and pro code modernization for clients from across industries. Joining him is Sreeni Pitchala, Senior Practice Director for Digital Enterprise, bringing more than a decade of experience leading large-scale ERP, cloud, and low-code, no-code transformation programs. Now I'll hand it over to Gitesh to get started.
Thanks, Kara, for a wonderful introduction. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Let's start. And before we deep dive into today's webinar on digital transformation and application modernization, let's have a quick poll to understand where is your organization in its application modernization journey right now. Wonderful. Yeah. There's still answers coming in. Okay. Okay. So let's start. And so today we are addressing a paradox that is currently shaping enterprise IT globally. Modernization funding is at an all-time high, and almost every large organization has a former cloud or a system migration roadmap in place. Yet, despite this, resources execution velocity remains inconsistent, and many programs stall immediately after achieving early milestones. That reason can be multiple reasons for that, and we'll be discussing what are the possible causes for the stalling of those particular initiatives. So as we walk through this briefing, and our call is to shift our strategic lens, modernization doesn't fail just because the platforms are old. Those fail because there is an issue on the connectivity, architecture, integration discipline. Uh, the discipline is not kept in place because when you are expanding the platform, the business rules, the architecture principles, the thought process from a business standpoint, so they're not kept in mind. So that could be the reason. And so next 15 to 20 minutes, we will be aligning on these three core risks holding back our initiatives, analyze the pitfalls of tool-centric thinking, outline a balanced portfolio approach that allows us to modernize safely with absolute operational continuity. So next up, the three modernization risks that I will be discussing today. The first one is the disruption risk. So let's align why so many well-funded transformation programs slow down or stall entirely. Modernization isn't a singular technology task. It represents three distinct systematic risks that leaders must govern continuously. First, we have a disruption risk. This is an operational vulnerability. In legacy environments, systems are tightly coupled. Upgrading any element threatens transactional downtime or catastrophic downtime on core databases. The executive concern here is immediate. There is a direct revenue loss during transition phases and brand degradations. We cannot swap the engines while flying the plane unless we decouple first. So hope this particular point is well understood. So structurally, the biggest and the most worrisome thought behind this is basically a revenue loss and a brand degradation. That are the two takeaways from this particular point. The second is the directional risk. From a strategic and a capital exposure perspective, modernization fails when teams over-engineer or misalign the business architecture, ending up with a solution that miss the market windows. Something which you have thought through, which you think makes sense, but it's not making sense from a market perspective, from a competitor landscape perspective. And this creates a massive opportunity cost, letting nimbler competitors leapfrog with the simpler, faster architectures. So while you spend millions in multi-year custom rewrites, those nimble and faster architectures are brought in place. Your competitors are much ahead than you. So this particular aspect of direction makes a very uh, important decision to make when you are actually getting into a modernization. And this needs to be mitigated well upfront in a place. The third one is basically the control risk. So platforms expand into hybrid environments. So there are compliance pipelines. So HIPAA is there, in Europe GDPR is there. So different, in India it's DPDP. So there are multiple compliance, multiple uh, aspects to that, and you don't afford to basically lose those areas. So structurally, basically, we risk losing data lineage, triggering identity policy drift, and falling into proprietary vendor traps. This makes really problematic, and this needs proper mitigation. Also, if we cannot prove regulatory compliance dynamically at execution time, the next cost that you will be adding to your transformation and modernization journey is the audit cost, which basically stalls the modernization velocity. So over a period of time, when you are basically modernizing and you basically look on to these three different aspects, from disruption to direction to control, these are equally important and their mitigation needs to be in time. If these are not mitigated in time, it becomes a absolute disaster for you when you get into further stages of your modernization. So up next, uh, what we'll be discussing is the tool trap. So from a technology standpoint, this is one of the most important things. Uh, so when you start your modernization journey, there's a lot of discussion on tools, this over that, this technology stack versus that. And yeah, those are important aspects, definitely. But then, like what in the earlier side we are discussing is how much you want to engineer and over engineer. There is a very thin line between engineering and over engineering. So this trap one needs to avoid. So from addressing the most common executive pitfall, where the modernization slows, the typical organization reflex is basically to look for a tool-centric fix, buying a new database, SQL, no SQL, Elasticsearch, MongoDB, go to a new SaaS suite, go to a new analytics module. And this is basically a critical misconception. And one must avoid early in the phase when you basically into a modernization stage, where you basically get into this discussion where you are more discussing on this tool over that tool, this technology over that technology. So that becomes an important trap. The second one is modernization is not just an engineering procurement challenge. It's basically a strategic connective alignment issue. Look at the numbers on the left, where we basically have 80% of organization adjusted or restructured their modernization strategy last year. The reason being because of these connectivity gaps and integration fragility, not because the tools themselves lack features. So when you think from a overall business perspective, you have multiple modules, multiple components in place where they are basically talking to each other. And most of the time, these integration layers, they need to be structured well. They need to be thought through well. And that's where, if you are doing it right, you will be ensuring that your modernization is going thoroughly and through properly. So at least you will not be in those 80% of the set. So next up, organization priorities, level integrations, and cohesive governance. They achieve an approach and achieve an average ROI of over 300%. This proves that success depends on how systems connect, not where they run. So another interesting thing is the discussion taking over on Azure over Google Cloud, AWS over Google Cloud, AWS or infrastructure as a services or software as a service. So those discussions. So structurally, if you look on this 300%, the ROI is unlocked immediately when the team focuses on integration outcomes and the migration outcomes. The two most, uh, I would say, ignored areas when one is getting into the modernization journey. So API contracts, schema agreements first, compliance pressures are there, moving servers to the cloud. It doesn't simply simplify the compliance unless policy enforcement is there. Data masking and identity checking executed computationally inside the integration layer. And third is the structural fit. The right strategic choice is to secure clean API boundaries and error trace path instead of piling on hyper specialized SaaS tools. So the two aspect, one is the integration one and the second one is the migration one. Those needs to be worked upon thoroughly, because if you look a particular um, area of business in a siloed way, you may see that it is working thoroughly and 100% fine. But the moment you look from a end-to-end perspective, from business, from starting of the business to the ending of the business, which is the starting of the value chain and the ending of the value chain, you start seeing issues. And these issues you will start seeing when you are later in the cycle, and that is too late. So when you are defining and designing this ecosystem, you need to be 100% thoughtful about your principles of integrations, how you basically need to define your contracts, how is your data is going to organize, what is your compliance choices, is there any compliance needed or not, what compliance is needed and what data is to be used, is there any PII related issues that you can face later on in the cycle due to compliance. So that's the tool trap and fit over features thing. Next. Okay. So how do you basically approach? Uh, so the approach from a portfolio approach to a strategic modernization roadmap. So to overcome modernization, enterprise leaders must pivot from infrastructure first to governance first operational portfolio. So to conclude the briefing, let's look at our action plans. To prevent and overcome modernization stalls, we must pivot away from high risk, big bang replacements. So, one thing in the technology side is what we call a strangler pattern, is which we use typically to basically take the areas, strangle it slowly and gradually, and then generate a value out of those. And this becomes a slow and gradual business business driver for your business to understand and to basically react to a particular change, rather than it being a one big bang shot where you basically bring everything to the business and then business is totally surprised about the things. So yeah. So so phase one is basically an assessment and audit. So before you touch a single line of legacy code, you must establish your integration fabric. This means standardizing API contracts, enforcing central security checkpoints, mapping out the full end-to-end data lineage of your legacy code. This phase is about establishing total visibility and control over data pathways. You can't just go and start building because you need to modernize, because you have all the necessary resources in place, the tech is in place. You don't just go and start coding on the things. You basically start with your present legacy code which is in place. You then think through like, okay, this particular thing is working in this particular state. What will be the integration looks like in a to be state? So there is an as a state which is your legacy, and then there is a to be state which will be your to be. So you basically go through that journey of understanding 100% your current data lineage, your current legacy code, the current way the integrations are in place, and that becomes your uh, first phase, and which is an assessment on audit. The second one is a distribution. So we must stop treating all application as equal. So when you basically redirect lightweight edge case apps to secure, governed, no code platforms, uh, taking the load of core engineering, and where you basically leverage low code integration hubs to orchestrate core transaction flows and metadata routing. This allows to reserve highly skilled pro code developers for what they do best: engineering proprietary algorithm and deep custom optimization. So what we mean to say here is, given an legacy application and you have a choice to rebuild it, there is no single way where you basically say, okay, I will do this all pro code and I will not use a no code, low code. So it's basically amalgamation of what fits where. So structurally, at certain position, you want the fitment, and certain areas are a right fitment for LCNC related stuff. There are certain areas which are specifically optimized for pro code, where it's deep engineering, there's deep tech, there are optimization, whether there are high number of transactions and all those stuff. So structurally, you basically distribute your portfolios into what goes where from a modernization perspective. Then the phase three is a governance phase, where where modernization is just not a one-time project. So most of the time, why you end up in a legacy is because you stop innovating, you stop modernizing incrementally. You just had something, you did it one time, you have that piece of code. Now you're just patching with some incremental and functional features here and there. It's a continuous thought process. So basically, you will have your ongoing operational posture, which you need to basically take into control. You basically embed computational guardrails directly into your runtime integration layers, enforcing real-time data masking, automating compliance logging, and then ensuring end-to-end trace mapping on every network transaction. So once you are there, you have decided, you have audited, you know what your legacy looks like, you have distributed, this is what goes in pro code, this goes in low code, and equally balanced. Chances are that somebody might be 100% pro code if they need if the needs is so can be 100% low code. Either ways. And then obviously then the third bit, the third one is, you basically have the continuous governance on what you have made, incrementally ensuring that whatever you have made is up there, and you basically are constantly monitoring and innovating on your areas. So by executing this structured portfolio-led strategy, you basically drastically reduce the execution risk and maximizing the capital efficiency. Also, this ensures the modernization initiatives remain aligned with the core business objectives with which you have started your modernization. With this, we accomplish and understand the portfolio perspective. Let's get on to our next goal, which will help us understand biggest challenge when it comes to modernization. Okay, so let's move on to the next So, uh, question now. So, pro code modernization and where it wins and why it wins basically. So, next up. Okay. So, what is that instills the confidence in pro code, and why it is there? Because of the core systems. So on this particular slide you will have the right side of it and the left side, and we'll go deep dive into each one of these areas and figure out what and why that confidence is instilled in the pro code on the core ecosystems. So let's shift our focus to the engine room of our enterprise system. And when we discuss modernization, there is a common executive temptation to basically assume that the goal is simply standardizing the workflows and replacing the old interfaces with the modern cloud forms. Our true modernization is about securing deep custom leverage where your core competitive advantage is created. This is where pro code development remains in your primary strategic asset. While low-code platforms are excellent for handling technical routing, simple front ends, and departmental automations, they are not architected to basically manage the dense, complex backbone of your business. So, in our experience, we have faced all these different flavors where we could see the misfitments. And when I say misfitments, in terms of to figure out where to use LCNCs and where to not use LCNCs, or rather than where to go pro code. So structurally, many times I personally have seen that most of the organization would just go with the capability that they have rather than what is right for them. Because from a capability perspective, it's the easiest choice because you have people on that particular area. You just start using them and then you get into an execution stage and then later on you figure out, oh, this is an absolute miss. So on the right side of the screen, we break down into four critical operational domains where code level depth wins. The first area being the business complexity and the business logic part of that. So your core legacy system, whether they are transactions, millions of them maybe, or there are custom financial ledgers, logistic scheduling, and all the different things. Let's say so they contain years of highly specific business IP and proprietary algorithms. Trying to model this complexity using visual block-based low-code templates is a critical failure pattern. It forces your engineering team to work around tool limitation rather than coding your exact operation logic, resulting in a brittle architecture that becomes difficult to debug and maintain. The second domain is obviously the scale and high volume computing. So many times we have seen like there are millions of transactions happening in a day, and these transactions are massive. So when your system needs a capability where it needs to process millions of events, API calls, database operations per second, every millisecond latency is translated basically directly into a computational overhead and cost. The Procore modernization allows your engineers to write custom low overhead memory pipelines, implement custom caching protocols, optimize runtime performance. Uh, Low code system by design wrap visual blocks into thick layer of generic auto-generated code, adding severe latency and resource bottlenecks that quickly collapses under the enterprise level stress. So said that saying this particular aspect of high volume compute, many of the time if you look at and the whole reason where the whole era of microservices started proliferating, and before even microservice there was the distributed ecosystem where you have multiple compute nodes, and the same then got elevated to microservice. You again have multiple compute nodes, but now they are like in one Kubernetes cluster, and because you are now able to share the compute and RAM and everything in one common backdrop, which is Kubernetes. So when you are designing this ecosystem, and this design basically needs to be stateless in nature, obviously there needs to be caching layer, some kind of caching needs to be in place where you're basically doing a high transaction throughput. So when you are trying to design all these things together and trying to bring it, that is where the control lies in case of pro code. Now, most of the low code, no code tooling will not allow you this particular kind of capability where you can have your own caching framework, or you can have your own horizontal scaling, which you basically are looking out for. So obviously, from a consumption point, yes, you can, but then structurally, if you look at, you basically try to improve the scale and everything. So yeah, that's an important aspect and becomes one of a candidature for pro code and where it wins. Um, I hope there is people who have issues. Okay. So the third one, connective integration and microservice boundaries. Basically, you move your monoliths, and it requires setting up a polyglot database cluster. And when I say polyglot database, not just polyglot database, these are polyglot application as well. Multi-tenant API gateways, asynchronous event queues, clean microservice boundaries. So these are all the integration related aspects which you basically need to take into consideration, and makes a winning point where you basically go with a pro code design and pro code thought process. The last one is basically criticality, auditability, and security. So when you are into a pro code state, you basically try to uh, identify the failures, and these failures are basically transaction failures because you are having a distributed ecosystem, multiple microservices, each service talking to another service. There are no transaction like real-time transaction rollbacks, which is possible in microservices world. So you need to be ultra careful when you basically designing those, where you have compensation events getting generated. So you basically go with saga pattern. There is you can use also SCQRS kind of pattern. You basically have a different database for read and writes. So basically, you try to do that data consistency within your ecosystem. But the reason and why you are doing this is because you need to have that horizontal scaling piece in between, and you need to basically scale it horizontally, which is not possible in an older ecosystem, in a low code, no code, where you basically try to add multiple instance of your services. Uh, then the next one is you basically enable your team to embed exact security wrappers and generate verifiable audit logs directly inside your application engines. So you writing a particular piece of uh, basically, what should I say? You're trying to optimize the areas around the security side of it. So you have encryption, so you can have your own custom encryption logic, uh, where you can have the areas where you basically don't want to share the data between the ecosystems or within the ecosystems. So it is totally in your control. All in all, if you look at uh, from a structure standpoint, it's 100% on the control side of it, from business logic to high volume throughput to integration complexity getting addressed by microservices, and obviously then the auditability and the security aspect where you basically can have your own uh, legacy engine or proprietary algorithms built in as part of it. You can have your own operational IPs. So these are the reason, and this is where the confidence lies. Okay. Next. So how do you basically de-risk the this whole ecosystem of pro code and all? So let's discuss the tactical execution from a modernization strategy. So when we are dealing with mission critical application that drive daily high volume transaction, maintaining absolute stakeholder and customer confidence, it's not just an accessory, it's an operational mandate. You can't just live without it, because like what we discussed in earlier slide, it's a brand value, it's a brand which makes sense. So if your application are not working in line with what customer are expecting, and if their experience is not so good, then it it's something which again turns into a revenue loss for business. So structurally, it's an 100% operational mandate. We cannot afford the risk of a big bang migration. So when you have a legacy ecosystem, there are 100,000 millions of transactions which you have in your legacy application. You basically take it to the newer ecosystem, and it won't be straightforward because you basically in your to be ecosystem, there will be some data which you want, and the next one you don't want certain things. So there basically you structure it out in a such a way that instead of going with a big bang migration, you go an incremental way. So the three core principle are incremental migration pattern. Like that's something important for us. Uh, the next important thing is domain driven design for us. So where each business is basically catered into a domain design. Uh, the segregation of the design with from monolithic to microservice. The third one is the connectivity mature, having a stable API schema contracts. The fourth one being the transition safeguards, this is the migration strategy. The fifth one being the data governance, where you basically have data strategy in terms of understanding the existing as is and then getting onto a to be state. And then obviously the sixth one being continuously measuring the outcomes and which are the business outcomes from both the architectural choice that you have made, and you basically measure, and in the area are basically some of you would have heard the DORA metrics, and then there are operational ROI, which basically an organization will decide what makes sense for them. So these are the architecture principle and the discipline that one must keep in mind when we are going ahead with the pro code approach and ensuring that we are de-risking what we are trying to create as a part of modernization. Next up. So clarity as to when the pro code is the right path. So let's establish some clear objective criteria for when to mandate pro code engineering versus when to leverage the rapid deployment of a low code tools. This is a vital decision framework for the executive team, as choosing the wrong path early in a project is one of the most common reasons digital modernization initiatives stalls or incur massive cost overruns. To guide this decision, we have structured our architectural rules into three pillars. So what are those three pillars? And let's get into those three pillars one by one. So the first one is the typical application fit. So these are basically standard architecture types within your software estate that must remain inside native handwritten development pipelines. So these are your systems of record and competitive differentiators, custom hardware telemetry decoders, low latency pricing, matching engines. These are some of the prime examples of an application fitment. The rule of thumb is here is very simple. If the application houses or operates your core proprietary intellectual property or is responsible for getting you that competitive advantage, it must be built with Pro code. Keeping this code native ensures your engineering team maintains absolute control over its scalability, performance, and future extensibility. And these all three pillars are important for any businesses in today's world. The next one is low code gaps. So gaps and limitation where low code fails. It is essential for business and IT leaders to recognize that visual development platforms, and most of the LCNCs would be visual platforms where you basically have a drag and drop, or maybe you will have connectors and everything. They are not just simplified code generators because the code behind them is already being written in such a way, and you as a user of those ecosystem will be using and placing those as a workflows, and then with an adapter thing you basically try to complete the flows. So these are basically restrictive runtimes when it comes to execution. When an application demands a custom mathematically intensive encryption or decryption routines, or requires precise uh, thread optimization or memory allocation to prevent resource starvation, the low code system will quickly reach their limits. because there's a runtime environment on top of which this low codes, no codes would be running. So trying to force a visual development tool to parse complex necessary structures to manage heavy hardware level optimization results in slow, unstable, and basically frustrated teams. Furthermore, in multi-tenant SaaS architecture and custom access control lists are notoriously difficult to implement security inside generic low code environments. So that's another point. The third one is the role of architecture. So a successful modernization strategy doesn't mean that it's build everything in isolation. It requires a strict systematic rigor. We must enforce microservice separation boundaries to be in place, and API schemas are in place, their contracts are in place, the versioning is in place, the architecture discipline is followed, uh, and with the advent of all this AI tooling, cloud, cursor, and everything, you need to have the right skills in place, and irrespective of it, the skills in place, you also need to have the right kind of convention and architecture structure that needs to be followed. Unless you are having all those principle and discipline in place, your program may fail. So, so, so what I mean to say here is you basically need to have your architecture discipline in place. If you don't have it in place, you can bring it in place and you will be through with it. So this should answer like the three pillar and where and why and how uh, the pro code path should be taken. So next up. So next up, we have a case study, and this case study is about a transportation brokerage firm. So for which we worked for basically modernization from legacy to a modernization ecosystem, and these customers of R was running an ecosystem of the era of more than 10 to 15 years old. So they were running this ecosystem. They didn't had any choice. They approached us, and that's how this journey started. We started with all the things that we have described above. We started understanding their business part of it, their data part of it. Uh, we almost like covered everything from their existing business to the to-be business ecosystem, understanding their data structure, understanding their business issues, and the outcomes and the result is what you can see, that we are able to basically double the productivity with the same team size, because this transportation business is more where you basically add load, create load, and you have so many numbers of transaction happening day in day out. And with the existing legacy system, they are really struggling on, because it was totally a desktop based application, from there to totally a web based microservice, polyglot database, and polyglot application. So here we basically had used Java and .NET, both the things suiting to that particular microservices. Each microservices had their own different tech stack. More than 21 systems were integrated in this whole piece. Uh, the daily transaction increased by more than 100%. We were able to reduce the legacy system licenses by 90% within 90 days of ecosystem. Automated workflows, timely updates, proactive issue resolution, enhanced shipment status were visible on the screen as it was happening, because we were using WebSockets. So from server to the client, all the communications were happening. The moment a load status got changed, it immediately went back to the screen, and the operator was able to see the status on the screen itself. Uh, Next up was we also integrated the analytics part for their executive management system and their managers. So bringing elastic data, bringing in the SQL data, what made sense for them, and then creating a total analytics solution on top of that for decision making. So that was the things that did for them, from legacy to modernization, from from ensuring that double the productivity from the same kind of team size. So that these are the goals that you basically are after when you are into a pro code ecosystem. With this, I wrap up the pro code part of it, and I would like to hand over to Sreeni, who will be taking you through the low code, no code journey.
Hey, thanks, Gishes. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So I know the foundation has been clearly laid out, by Gitesh, like how the challenges in terms of on the opportunities in terms of what app modernization brings in. So from the perspective of that, and the other aspect of that is critically plays the role is the low code, no code platforms. Can you go to next slide? So one of the things that is most debated about low code, no code platform is two school of thoughts, right? One is people always said, hey, this is the path forward in terms of modernizing the software delivery, right? And software delivery itself is how this will be transformed through low code, no code. The second school of thought is no, this is a fancy shadow AI with some cool UIs and all that. Well, in both of them, there is some merit to those, right? Depending on how you use it and what your experience is. But in general, if you see, it's the question should be around, hey, it's low code, no code really brought the value to the business or value to the teams. If it brings, then where does it really apply? Where do we get the wins with low code, no code modernization? And definitely this low code modernizing with low code, no code for applications definitely had an impact, right? And we have seen many cases. So some of them that I would like to more bring in here is one is, for example, rapid prototyping. Typically, we have seen it that when somebody wanted to do some new ideas, new thoughts came in, we spend cycles of time in terms of requirements, in terms of spend few sprints, maybe couple of months, and then only to realize that it is not fulfilling it or it's not the way to do it. And on top of it, a lot of times with the IT teams being choked up with the work, then it has to be in the backlog and do it. So there's a lot of time lost. So one of the things that you can accelerate is, okay, you do adopt the low code, create a quick prototype, right, and then validate whether you want to then validate whether you want to invest the engineering effort to make it more deployable and more productionized. If not, you move on from it or you tweak it and then take it another prototype, right? That's the advantage. So it creates an agility in terms of looking at the quick value, whether that particular thought or that particular idea of that having that functionality will really help or not. And that validation also helps, economically, right? Where, you are not really burning whole lot of efforts before you back out from that. That's the rapid prototyping. The second one that we don't really, I mean, a lot of IT organizations don't even realize is there's a lot of set of applications that really do not need a central AI team to focus and develop them and build it to the business, right? For example, if they are workflows, if they are like dashboards that they can build on their own, or if there is simple HR onboarding form or checklist form or compliance checklist, some of these, right, the business knows the requirements better, and then when you change something, how it should behave, they know faster. And some of them are again low risk, low complex because they're simple processes. So some of those will be the ideal candidates where you can actually use the low code platform in terms of making it quicker. And it also helps for business, right? Whoever is the users can tweak it as and when needed because the change in their process, in their workflows, approval processes can often change. And when it changes, they can react faster. Those are some of the applications that fall in the second category, right? And the third one is integration and automation. While your journey starts on modernization, it doesn't mean that overnight you will have all the applications ready and everything, right? But as the journey goes through, you can actually start looking at your integrations. For example, your ERP still may have to talk to your new CRM that you already replaced, right? And you may want to have created a new reporting layer that your legacy still need to connect and send the data, or you may have to create a new workflow with the existing as the transition is happening. So some of these where instead of again building a whole custom uh, level kind of integrations, on that or automations, what you actually can do is, create some of these with platforms like Dell Boomi or Power Automate or MuleSoft that you can quickly get using some of the built-in accelerators and built-in connectors if you can, right? A lot of these tools will have built-in connectors that will quickly enable you to do that and then get the value, right? And then eventually when you complete your modernization, some of these can go away. With the little effort that you built this, you get the value out of it rather than building a uh, complex integrations again. So summing up, this is the best fit. Where do they really best? That's what we summarize is that change velocity is high. This is what we talked about. Frequently change, the kind of rules that business looks at it. Domain complexity typically is low. The process is not very, very complex, right? And and the third one is where the business agility is priority. Again, this goes back to change velocity as well, right? Where the business frequently comes with them and do it, right? Um, so these are the three aspects that keep in mind. And then the second one is okay. So yeah, go to the next one. So the second one is, how do we get confidence in terms of using low code, no code? So the way you need to do is you protect your core, which is your core systems that you keep it. Start doing it, take an inventory about it, which are the ones that can be low-hanging fruits that can be easily replaced or migrated to the new system, or you can just build a simple low code integrations for that. So map their dependencies, classify them, right? And then modernize around the core first. Don't just try to do core itself in the beginning. So try to modernize it around. It will also provide an opportunity to kind of replace or get a new interfaces or new integrations to either third parties or your own systems that are already modernized. And then start changing the workflows, reporting, and automation and all. Then this is the third piece is where you talked about, as earlier Gitesh mentioned, try to decouple the logic that you can do it and you can scale it, either on cloud or through microservices or to containerization. That is where you isolate the functionality that is really glued to the core, but that doesn't need to be glued to the core, and that can also serve multiple applications. And the fourth one is important again, is where you do in waves, migrate in waves. Big bang in modernization has never been typically successful. There may be cases where they are done, but that's high risk for the business, as well as it creates a complexity, and there will be a lot of overhead as well, right? So create waves that are more reasonable, and the waves that you do is the low risk, high value. You identify, what is low risk, high value, and then high risk, high value, kind of thing. Take all those and put it in those parameters, and then do that. And then the last point is the governance. The most important thing is the governance part. Ensure that we don't lose focus on what kind of low code, how many of low code platforms you are bringing in, the way how it is used. It can easily get again out of control if we don't have control and governance, and then can they be productionized? Because if you just put them for as a band-aid solutions, but then eventually they won't be able to scale up. So the important part is governing and scaling. Okay. Can we go to the next slide? So the clarity. So when we want to get the clarity, right? So where do we really apply them, and why not? So internal process applications. This is what I touched upon before. So if it is about approvals, if it is about workflows, where HR typically wants to create a simple onboarding templates that where people can quickly follow. It's the easiest one, right, to do it. And then HR can change depending on their needs, how frequently they want to change it, right? Similarly, workflows and approval flows, as well as, some of again, we talked about reports that quickly people want to build their own reports, right? That's the one. And the second one is customer and employee portals. Customer experience will become very, 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 very critical, right? I mean, when you are putting it the UX UI, customers want to see something that is ease of use. And when you introduce something, they should not follow like 5 more steps than the new functionality you are introducing. So some of these are very easy with low code, no code, replicate, you prototype and quickly deploy it. So these portals will become very, very, right opportunities for low code, no code adoption of it. Obviously, reporting and data collection is something that we have seen. Again, as I said, there are a lot of platforms that are already coming up with the built-in connectors to different systems, right? Either it is cloud or internal systems or even the database, legacy databases. That's one thing, and then also APIs that are available there. So this becomes easier for us, for anybody to quickly, adopt low code, no code, right? So, and legacy apps and stable core, this is the area where low code is probably not the right fit. I would not say right away it is the right fit. So you probably have to modernize around the core. So take the pieces around it and then think about the part and transactions. So this is like our ERP, CRM, which are legacy applications that it's not easy to do it like with low code and all. What they have to happen is you typically do is lift and shift. If you are in on-premise and you want to go to cloud, that's the first step. You do it, making it available for people, modernizing how they access it versus, through VPNs or through their laptops. You can make them available, through the new authentication processes. So that will help them to access anywhere. And then start refactoring around. Okay, refactoring again goes back to what portion of it you would use low code, what portion of it you use pro code. So that's the way you do for that. And then the last one is where again you have high volume regulated. This is where we need to very, very carefully analyze and say what part needs to be, from a compliance and regulatory perspective, can you really replace it, right? This is where low code again will have very not so considerable impact. The reason is because you may want to keep things the way they are, based on the requirements, based on the retention requirements. The data has to stay in certain systems. You have a system of record requirements. You probably cannot really read the system, and then you have regulations around it, privacy around it. So those are the things where you need to very carefully evaluate whether building something with pro code where you will have control is better option than low code. So that's how these are kind of applicable. So you will get some clarity based on the nature of the applications. Okay. And similar to the previous one, we had a case where we actually the case study where one of our customer from manufacturing. So we had legacy applications which are more PHP, and then the biggest challenge was that there is a lot of technical debt in it, a lot of things that are built around, which could have been kind of more done around microservices, reusability, and all that. But and also the the on-premise infrastructure they had was very limited, and one of the reasons they could not really make it available to people more widely is because it's all on-prem. It was not easily portable to cloud because of a lot of dependencies, the legacy and all that. And it's anything that they needed to make a change required a huge rework and huge changes. So the way we did is again, we prioritized. We took about 20 plus applications through the Power Apps and Power Automate. One of the things that we did is also we kind of migrated their master data as well as some of the permission databases into Azure. So it is easily they can access it. And the entire application itself is migrated, right? Some of the applications. And then the deployment was a big challenge for them, right? Every time they make a change. So we kind of brought in Azure DevOps into that where we built end-to-end deployment cycle where they can quickly deploy whenever they make changes. So those things actually resulted their maintenance cost, first thing, the biggest one, where, for them, the lead time, right? If they have some change to be made, the lead time that it took is quite long, and also the amount of effort they kept, we brought it down significantly. Again, global accessibility, as I mentioned, by enabling the single sign-on as well as moving on to cloud, more people were now able to access it and wherever they can, right? And that's other thing. And security, obviously, we enabled SSO, and then there is multi-factor authentication and all is enabled on it. So that helped. And whenever they do even the integration, it was built in, security connectors were there. The ROI realization also the customer has realized for this in almost 6 months. So this was one of the success stories for us with the low code, no code platform. You want to move to next slide? So, one thing that you can see if people can really scan it, one of the things that we kind of offer is whether based on these questions, how to put pro code into action, what kind of best practices and what kind of things that approach you can follow. And then also same thing with low code, no code, and or even if you want to just get started and say, hey, we don't know what is the starting point, or we are in the middle of this, and then how to navigate from here. Any of these conversations would like to be more than happy to have a session, right? And definitely we will reach out to you and then have that workshop done. So if people, for those who cannot really take this, scan this at this time, there is also a poll, I think that will come up. You can actually take that poll, and based on that, we'll again reach out to you guys. Um, so, so take this if you can, right? Um, I'll give a few more seconds and then we'll move to the next slide for people to scan it. Well, let's go to the next slide. So, Synaptic, correct? We have done this many places, and then the modernization and the digital transformation is something that we fundamentally worked at our core. So we have this experience, and one of the things that we have is we start from an advisory role all the way to we have something called managed experience model where we have actually deployed it and have the consistent results. And one of the things that we do across all this is instead of just seeing this as a technical modernization, right? We look at more like a business outcome based modernization that brings the true value for business in terms of measurable outcomes, right? And it is enabled by three things, right? One is we have AI is significantly adopted in across all our processes where we have AI embedded into all the processes and operations. The second thing is we have global delivery, and that is something that provides us a big scale, right? Where we can react faster, and then we scale up people, scale up tools, and then deliver it, on the timelines. And the third one is, outcomes. As I explained, we will have measurable outcomes. We will continue to measure instead of just making it, oh, this migration is successful. What does it mean? How many users? What was the result? And similar to the case study we have shown, we actually measure in terms of ROI. So that's how we do it. And when we talk about applications, it's just not one set of applications that we are talking about, right? So we not only talk about business applications, we also will look at databases, we look at analytics, even collaboration tools, platform engineering, and all that. And one of the things is there are variations of this modernization like refactoring, rehosting, re-engineering, and then even in replacing. All these aspects are considered, and we kind of take through advisory uh, perspective, which are them better fit, and then we move from there. And our experience also is really vast in terms of across the industries that we do, right? I mean, if you see on the lower right side, we have literally every industry that we touched upon modernization, and each industry has um, its own requirements in terms of what works in that industry, what regulations. Some industries are highly regulated, some industries are more where you can have more innovation can be brought in. So those are the aspects that we do. Yeah. So with that, I think anything else is there, you can always contact us. Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and close out. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you registered through VIB with your business email and you have any questions, please contact webinars@vib.tech. Thank you again and have a great day, everyone.